Welcome to the channel where history meets mind-blowing facts. Here your knowledge will get a powerful boost with every video. From hidden events to legendary figures, we cover it all.
In the sweltering heat of the summer of 1776, while most Americans were still adjusting to the boldness of their newly declared independence, the war for that freedom was already a terrifying reality. British warships loomed like monsters in the waters of New York Harbor, massive black silhouettes casting long shadows over the frightened, under-equipped continental forces. The British Navy, the most powerful in the world, had turned the American coast into a prison. Their hulking ships, armed with rows of deadly cannons and manned by thousands of sailors, patrolled the waters like vultures waiting for the final breath of a dying rebellion. Every movement on land or sea was watched. Escape was impossible. Attack? Unthinkable. And yet, in the quiet corners of Connecticut, a young man named David Bushnell dared to imagine the impossible. A Yale graduate with a mind that never rested, Bushnell was not a soldier, not a commander, and certainly not someone you'd expect to alter the course of warfare. But what he had was vision, a dangerous, unbelievable, almost mad vision. While others built rifles and stocked cannons, Bushnell was building something completely insane. A vessel that could travel beneath the water's surface, unseen, silent, and deadly. Not a ship, not a boat, a submarine. It sounded like science, fiction. It sounded like suicide. But to Bushnell, it was science, pure logic, bold engineering, and a desperate solution to an overwhelming enemy. The logic was simple. If the Americans couldn't fight the British Navy head-on, maybe they could strike from below, where no ship had ever gone, where no defense was prepared, where a single man, inside a wooden sphere, could change the course of a war. So he began. In a secret workshop lit only by oil lamps and burning ambition, Bushnell constructed the first-ever submersible designed for warfare. It was a strange, bulbous machine made of oak planks, bound by iron, sealed with tar and leather. Inside, it barely had room for a single person to crouch. The walls sweated in the heat, the air was barely breathable, and everything was controlled by muscle. Pedals for motion, a hand crank for vertical movement, and a primitive system of pumps and valves to adjust buoyancy. There were no electronics, no navigation, no guarantee of survival, just gears, guts, and guesswork. But the most shocking element wasn't the sub itself. It was its purpose. This tiny underwater craft was meant to sneak beneath the belly of a British warship, drill a hole in the hull, attach a timed explosive, and disappear. Bushnell's invention, if it worked, wouldn't just sink a ship. It would prove to the entire world that the British Navy wasn't invincible. That technology, American technology, could defeat sheer power. That freedom didn't need numbers. It just needed one man in the dark, beneath the water, willing to try. And yet the dangers were staggering. The pilot would be trapped inside. The machine with no light, no fresh air, and no help. If the valves failed, he'd drown. If the pumps jammed, he'd sink. If he lost direction, he could drift under the harbor forever, suffocating in a floating coffin. But Bushnell was obsessed. He tested every mechanism relentlessly. He built miniature bombs that could detonate underwater. He partnered with fellow Genius Isaac Doolittle to create a clockwork detonator that could delay the explosion, giving the pilot just enough time to escape. He turned his dream into something real, something terrifyingly real. When he unveiled it to General George Washington's advisors, they didn't laugh. They were stunned, shocked, curious, desperate enough to consider it. The idea of a secret weapon that could cripple the Royal Navy from beneath was too tempting to ignore. With war raging and cities burning, Bushnell's submarine, nicknamed the Turtle because of its rounded shell-like body, wasn't just approved. It was prepped for battle. The Turtle wasn't beautiful. It wasn't fast. But it was a weapon unlike anything seen before. A dome of darkness with a single human soul inside, surrounded by levers, gears, and an explosive payload that could rip through a warship's belly like a steel claw. No nation had ever built such a thing. No one knew if it would work. But it didn't matter, because in the eyes of the revolutionaries, the very fact that it existed meant something monumental. It meant that the Americans weren't just fighting back, they were thinking ahead. Imagine being inside that thing. No room to stretch your legs. No sound but the creak of wood, the splash of water, and your own heartbeat hammering in your ears. Above you, somewhere in the night, loomed an enemy ship the size of a building, bristling with guns and surrounded by patrol boats. Below you, only darkness and the weight of the sea. One mistake, and you're not a hero. You're a ghost. A vanishing act in the black water, absolutely. Here's an expanded 800-word version of Chapter 2, continuing the same intense, cinematic, and attention-grabbing style, without headings or an ending sentence. It was still dark when the Turtle was carefully lowered into the murky waters of New York Harbor. The year was 1776, and the air was thick with tension and gunpowder. The British had occupied New York, and their ships anchored off the coast were more than just military power. They were symbols of domination. Floating fortresses like HMS Eagle, a 64-gun beast of the Royal Navy, watched over the harbor with silent menace. No one on board suspected that beneath the calm surface of the water, a silent predator was about to attempt the impossible. Inside, that hand-built underwater vessel crouched a single man, Sergeant Ezra Lee. He wasn't a sailor. He wasn't a scientist. He was a soldier. Strong, determined, and brave enough to accept a mission that no other man had attempted in history. As the hatch sealed shut and darkness wrapped around him like a shroud, Lee was alone. Truly alone. No lights, no sound, no backup. Just gears to turn, pedals to push, and a mission that bordered on suicidal. Above him, the moon hung low, casting a silvery glow on the British ships that slept like giants in the harbor. Beneath, the Turtle moved, slow, awkward, deliberate. Every crank of the propeller took effort. Every breath inside the cramped cabin came with a dose of panic. The air was already thick and stale. The candlelight inside, used to illuminate his primitive compass, flickered and fought for oxygen. And yet, Lee pressed on. Navigating underwater in the 18th century wasn't navigation at all. It was guesswork. The harbor's currents fought against the little wooden sphere like a predator sensing prey. Lee struggled to stay on course, struggling, against the invisible hands of the water trying to spin and toss the Turtle like driftwood. Time crawled by, Every minute inside the vessel felt like an hour. Every inch forward was paid for with sweat and pain. But there it was, just ahead, the massive shadow of HMS Eagle. It towered above him, its hull a wall of timber and copper. The turtle slowly rose, driven upward by sheer will and the crude mechanics Bushnell had invented. The idea was simple. Get close, drill into the hull, attach the timed explosive charge, and get out. But execution was anything but simple. The British warship had a copper-sheathed bottom, something Bushnell and Lee hadn't fully accounted for. When Lee pressed the drill into the hull, it met something unyielding. The bit wouldn't catch. He tried again, changing angles, straining with all his strength as the turtle bobbed and twisted in the invisible underwater chaos. The clock was ticking, not just on the bomb, but on Lee's very life. The air inside the sub was running low. The candle sputtered. Sweat poured down his face. His limbs trembled from exhaustion. His mind reeled from the claustrophobia. And all the while, just feet above, the British sailors aboard the HMS Eagle slept peacefully, completely unaware that a revolutionary nightmare had come knocking from the deep. Still, Lee refused to give up. He tried another spot on the hull, then another. Was it iron plating? Was it the angle? Was it fate itself laughing at him? Whatever the reason, the drill simply wouldn't pierce the hull. Time was slipping through his fingers. His vision blurred, his muscles screamed. And then, in a moment of cold clarity, he knew it was over. He couldn't attach the bomb. He couldn't complete the mission. But failure didn't mean surrender. Lee detached the explosive charge, which had a timed fuse built to detonate after. He made his escape. Then, with the last of his strength, he turned the turtle away from the Eagle and began the agonizing journey back. But fate wasn't finished with him yet. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, the turtle was spotted by British guards. A strange ripple in the water. A silhouette that didn't belong. Alarm bells rang out. British rowboats were dispatched. Muskets loaded. The hunter had become the hunted. Lee jettisoned ballast water to rise faster. The turtle broke the surface like a wounded beast, gasping for air as its pilot scrambled to stay ahead of the enemy. Behind him, the clockwork charge floated quietly, unseen, unnoticed, until moments later it exploded with a force that shattered the calm of the harbor. A column of water surged skyward. The blast echoed across the bay. British boats froze in shock. Sailors shouted, pointing, confused and terrified. They had no idea what had happened. No clue that the explosion was man-made. No concept of a submarine. To them, it was as if the sea itself had rebelled, as if the Americans had found some unholy weapon drawn from myth or madness. Panic set in. Rumors flew like cannonballs. The British Navy, so confident, so untouchable, had been shaken to its core, not by an army, not by a fleet, but by one man in a wooden machine the size of a barrel. The mission had failed. Or at least, that's how it seemed at first. Sergeant Ezra Lee had not been able to plant the explosive beneath HMS Eagle's hull. The drill bit had failed to pierce the copper sheathing, and the bomb, though detonated, hadn't crippled the flagship of the British fleet. To many, the American turtle seemed like nothing more than a failed experiment, a dangerous and costly disaster that would be discarded and forgotten. But to the soldiers, sailors, and leaders watching the events unfold, something much deeper had happened that night. The explosion that rang out across the harbor was not just the sound of a blast. It was the sound of something much bigger, of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of battle, and a new kind of possibility. It was the first real demonstration that, even in the face of overwhelming power, the smallest, most unexpected of weapons could strike fear into the hearts of the mightiest. The British had been caught off guard by a weapon they could neither understand nor defend against. A single man had dared to take on an entire fleet, and though the mission failed, the psychological impact was enormous. In the days and weeks that followed, rumors of the attack spread like wildfire across both sides of the conflict. British soldiers and sailors whispered of a mysterious force beneath the waves. They had no idea what had caused the explosion, but they were terrified by the possibility that the Americans could strike from the deep again. What else could they do? What other secret weapons did the rebels have? The Royal Navy had been humbled by something they couldn't even see, let alone fight. For the Americans, it was a moment of grim pride. While the attack on HMS Eagle was unsuccessful, the idea of underwater warfare had been born. It wasn't just a failed mission. It was a challenge to the established rules of war. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, the will to fight could produce something extraordinary. The Turtle, for all its flaws and limitations, had proven that technology, innovation, could tip the scales of a war. It wasn't about size, it wasn't about numbers. It was about the courage to do the unthinkable. David Bushnell's invention, though never fully realized in the way he'd hoped, had sparked a revolution in warfare. It showed the world that even the smallest forces could find new ways to strike, to innovate, to challenge those who thought themselves invincible. While the Turtle would never sink a British ship, its legacy would not be forgotten. The idea of submarine warfare, a weapon of stealth, surprise, and psychological terror, would be carried forward into the future. Every modern submarine, from the deepest, most advanced nuclear-powered subs to the smallest reconnaissance craft, owes its origins to the humble Turtle and its brief, explosive mission. But the world was not quite ready for such an idea. The Turtle was abandoned, its design flawed by the limitations of the time. After the failed attack on HMS Eagle, the project was shelved. The British Navy, undeterred, continued its reign over the seas. The American revolutionaries, still struggling to hold on to their independence, turned to other methods of warfare, relying on more conventional tactics. And yet, the ideas behind the Turtle lived on, quietly, beneath the surface of history, waiting for a time when technology and warfare would catch up to Bushnell's radical vision. In many ways, the legacy of the Turtle is not in its immediate success, but in its daring attempt to defy the norms of battle, to challenge everything that was known about naval warfare at the time. It was a symbol of hope for a fledgling nation struggling to survive against overwhelming odds. It proved that ingenuity could match brute force, that a single determined individual could create a weapon that would change the very nature of war. It was the first crack in the foundation of naval power, and though it would take centuries for submarine warfare to become a reality, the spark had been lit. So while the American Turtle may not have sunk a British ship, It succeeded in ways that were more significant than anyone could have imagined. It demonstrated the power of innovation, the courage of a single man, and the unrelenting spirit of a nation that would not back down. And perhaps most importantly, it showed the world that the future of warfare was not bound by what had come before it. It was not about might alone. It was about new ideas, ideas that could change the world. If you found the story of the first submarine attack in history as fascinating and mind-blowing as I did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got so many more incredible, untold stories to share with you about the hidden moments in history that shaped our world. Stay tuned for more shocking tales, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. History is full of surprises, and we're just getting